Let's talk about some smut. The first book I read was Bully by Penelope Douglas. I actually read 3 Penelope Douglas smut books. Bully is about a girl who used to be best friends with the boy next door. Over the years they grow apart and he begins to torment her and become her bully. I've read a lot of these types of smutty books where the guy treats the girl like shit for some unknown reason in their past, you know, some sort of revenge tale. Personally, I like smutty books that are a bit rougher and a bit meaner, so I think that's why I end up reading so many books like this with this same storyline. Personally, for my taste, the love interest in the book isn't mean enough, and I know that sounds terrible, but that's just what I happen to be into. I do feel like it's more realistic than some of the other ones I've read. He's doing like regular bully things, you know, spreading rumors about her and like tripping her in the hallway and stuff like that. Stuff that actually does seem like high school pettiness. One of the things that bug me with these types of smut books is that they always have some sort of mystery background or something that happened, but they tease it out along the way because the girl never knows what it is that she did. And usually the girl never actually did anything. It always ends up being some misunderstanding. In this one, you know kind of where it's going. You kind of know why he became so distant. One thing I will say about Penelope Douglas is she takes her time building her characters. She takes her time telling the story and building the connections to each other before she actually gets to like the sex. The thing that stood out for me with this book above all these other books like this is the main character in this one. She's nuts. I mean, if I knew her in real life, I would be like, okay girl, calm down, because her answer for everything is to destroy someone's property. I'm so sick of seeing the girls in these types of stories where they're just, you know, they let the guy treat them like crap and they don't say a word about it. This girl fights back the whole time, and I appreciated the hell out of that. So anytime she was fucking shit up, I was like, yeah, you go girl. It's definitely not my favorite of these books. Many things were kind of predictable, but I am interested in the next one in this series. But after that, I don't know if I'll keep reading them because I did see that there's a lot in this series, and the second one's the only one that sounds interesting to me. I gave this book a 3.5. Another book I read by Penelope Douglas was Corrupt, which is #1 in the Devil's Night series. Corrupt is a series about 4 male best friends. They're like the popular guys in school. Many of them are rich. They might all be rich, I can't remember. But on Devil's Night, the night before Halloween, they always just like pull crazy pranks and just go around and do property damage and just, you know, screw up the town. That's always the flashbacks in these books. And then there's the present day where many of the boys are just, 3 out of 4 of the boys are just getting out of prison for some stunts they pulled on Devil's Night. They believe that Rika, the main character in this first book, is the one who turned them in. So they've decided to get revenge on her. She has no idea why these guys are making her life hell. You kind of know going in as you read that it's not going to end up having been Rika to have turned them in. I mean, that's just obvious. There's one in particular, Michael, who's interested in her because on Devil's Night years ago they had some connection and a fling or whatever. Personally, I didn't find either of these characters to be particularly memorable. I enjoyed some of the dynamics between them. I enjoyed how he kind of pushed her to give in to her darker urges. I liked some of the like back and forth between her and the guys in the group, and I liked that he also encouraged her to help herself. But other than that, it was just kind of meh. What really stood apart was the Devil's Night story and like these guys' friendship. The flashbacks were definitely the more interesting part. But the one thing I will remember about this story forever is they have a threesome in this story that nearly made me cry. Which sounds weird, but it's so emotional. That threesome scene is gonna stick in my head for a while. I do want to preface all this by saying that like you do need to go into this knowing that there is a ton of problematic shit in this book. Honestly, there's a bunch of problematic shit in a lot of the smut books I read. But anyways, yeah. Emotional threesome scene for the win. I gave this a 4. Another book by Penelope Douglas that I read was Hideaway, which is the second book in the Devil's Night series. So the first book was about Michael and Rika. The second book is about Kai, another member of the group, and Banks. It's the same sort of setup where they do the flashbacks to a Devil's Night from previous years, and then the present day where they're trying to... There's a lot This book has a lot to do with the first one and what happened in it, but basically they're trying to find out some information and they think that Banks could help them do that. The main thing I liked about this one was the characters. Kai and Banks are much more complex characters than Michael and Rika were in the first one. I just feel though like the story didn't live up to how interesting they were, because their setup was just kind of weak and it just felt like there was no forward momentum in the storyline that they were given. Half the time I didn't really understand where the story was going or why they were even really around each other. I gave it a 3.5. The next book I read was Dead by Nina Jones. So I have a lot of feelings about this book. So this book is about a girl who's into rape fantasies, and she decides that she's going to accept this kink and embrace it. And she hears from her best friend that there's this company where you can enter all your information and hire a guy to act out this fantasy with you. And I was like, this is really interesting. I love that it's kind of a book about, you know, not feeling shameful for the kink that you're into. And then they got rid of that premise within like 2 chapters. Instead of the guy who's supposed to come and rape her, a guy from her past that she doesn't remember at all actually comes and rapes her. Because she had hired this guy to act out this scene with her, she just thinks that it's this guy from the company, until a little later when she realizes that no, she was actually raped. And so that's super uncomfortable. Obviously that's all dicey, and of course this is a romance book, so she ends up having actual feelings for this guy. First of all, I was so aggravated with this change of premise that I feel like I had a little chip on my shoulder for the rest of the book. But besides that, I also just really hated this guy. It switches point of views back and forth between her and him, and he was just such a hateful person, and I'm used to that in these types of revenge storylines, but he was beyond that. Like, he was really, like, he just seemed like he hated all women, and just the way he thought about women and the way he thought about her was just really kind of disgusting. This book is called Debt, and the main male character's name is Tax, and that makes me want to punch something. That is so mind-blowingly cheesy that I am deeply upset about it. So there's that too. They spend a lot of time teasing out his backstory and teasing out why he's so pissed at this girl. And I mean, first of all, you know that once again she's not going to have ended up doing this thing. What they tease out, the information that they tease out, you know what happened. Because of the way they do it, you know eventually what happened before they ever get to that scene. Once they get to that scene, it is heart-wrenchingly, like, awful. It is so tragic and so terrible, and the way they wrote it, like, it actually really hits you hard. Like, even though you know going into it what's gonna happen, it hits so much harder when it's actually there on the page. And because of that, after reading that chapter, I completely changed my mind about him. Not that that makes it okay what he's doing to her, obviously it doesn't. I feel like they could have put that scene at the beginning of the book. It was like a little late to finally switch my feelings on him, and I just feel like it didn't add anything to the book to save it till that point. I will say I absolutely love the last quarter of this book. It is incredibly dark and kind of beautiful in a way and very cinematic. Like, all I could do was picture it as a movie, but I love a dark ending. I love dark twists. Just wish that the stuff before it had been a little bit different, because I feel like this would have been a 5-star read. But I gave it 4 stars. I also think his relationship with his sister was very interesting. I feel like I should say that when a book has some sort of problematic element, like a lot of the books that I read, if they were any other books, I would be absolutely like in flames about the type of shit that goes on in these smut books. But because they're smut, I feel like it depends on your kink whether it's okay or not, and because I'm into like rougher, meaner stuff, I'm way more willing to forgive problematic things than I would be with any other book, if that makes sense. The next book I read is Willing Victim by Cara McKenna. This might be my new favorite smut book. I love this book so much. It's actually a novella. This one is beautiful. This book is basically just about 2 people who meet and they flirt and hit it off, and then he introduces her to kind of forceful sex. First of all, this is just such a more realistic smut book than any other one I've ever read, and I love the love interest. Like, he's my new favorite, like, character boyfriend. He's so much different than all the other love interests in the types of books I usually read, because usually they're super rich and they're broody and, you know, they're smart, but they barely freaking speak and they treat the girl like crap and whatever. This guy is pretty much the complete opposite of all that. He's kind of a self-professed meathead. He's simple, but he's happy, and he's well-adjusted with everything that he does sexually. Like, he's not tortured about it. He's accepted that this is what he's into, and he likes exploring that. He's also just a normal guy with a normal job. He works in construction. He doesn't belong to some crazy, insane Donald Trump tax bracket. There's no tragic backstory. He's just a guy who likes what he likes. And I appreciate the hell out of that. I definitely pictured Channing Tatum when I read this book, who normally I'm not into, but I just feel like he fits this role so perfectly. They have a very realistic conversation about consent and boundaries, where they're just sitting there drinking a beer, casually talking about it, and once again, it just felt so much more grounded than all these other, like, contracts and shit that they sign in some of the books I've read, and I just appreciated that this seems like a relationship that people actually have. I also just appreciate that the entire book is well adjusted about sex, which I feel like a lot of books aren't. I gave this 5 stars for sure. Everybody should read it. It's awesome. I love that it's a book about exploring your darker side when it comes to sex and how that's okay. Ruthless People by J.J. McAvoy. I hate this book so much. The book is about 2 people who are both heads of their own mafia families. The girl's the head of the Italian mafia, and the guy's the head of the Irish mafia. They're promised to wed or something by their parents, so then they get thrown together and, yeah, they're supposed to rule a kingdom, basically. So I can just say my big problem with it right now, it comes down to one thing: it's just so repetitious. Like, you can read the first couple chapters and you've read the whole book. Basically, the 2 characters in this book are extremely violent. That's all they have going for them. That's their entire personality. They don't have any other dimensions to them. They're just people who like to kill. They constantly talk about killing, they constantly think about killing, and then they actually kill people. And it gets so old so quick. You would think that that sort of thing would be exciting, and somehow they made it super boring. Once they actually stop thinking about killing and start actually doing it, there are some fun action scenes, but they're very few throughout, and I feel like this could have been a very fun book, but you can only read so many times how they want to kill each other. The sex scenes also are not that good. There's not that many of them, and the ones that there are kind of vague, not very detailed, and they're kind of generic. Like, there's nothing special about them. So I don't know what I sat through this book for. I almost DNF'd this book so many times, but I dragged myself through it just so I felt like I could talk about it. It was not worth it. And then I found out it was a series, and I was like, there's no effing way I am reading more of this shit. Yeah, I hated this. I think I gave this 1.5 stars. The next book I read was Dead of Eve by Pam Godwin. This book was weird. Dead of Eve takes place in an apocalyptic setting where someone has weaponized a virus and turned all of the women into aphids or aphids, some sort of bug. All the women then attack the men, and obviously people are dying, and anyways, there's only one woman left alive, and that's Eve. Also, all of the children and old people died during all this. Obviously, you wouldn't think that this would be a smut book, but it was supposed to be. There wasn't a lot of sex in this one. When I first started the book, I read at the very beginning where there's an author's note where she says how this book is kind of slow going and there isn't a lot of sex, but then she said her second book was the smuttiest thing she's ever written, and so I was like, damn, I'm buying the second book right now, which I kind of regret, and you'll see why. So the first book starts off with Eve going through some grief because her 2 children have died. So that was a really depressing start. Usually when I pick up these types of books, I'm looking for easygoing fun, but that's definitely not what I got here. They do a really good job throughout the book, just in any depression depressing situation of making you feel what she feels. They do a great job of building atmosphere. There are lots of details. Eventually they do kind of leave their house and venture on to try and find other people. And then more depressing shit happens. Like I said, she's the only woman left alive, so I feel like you can probably guess what happens. It's really depressing for a good long chunk of this book. In the book, her children's spirits kind of lead her on this journey of where she has to go, because she kind of has this destiny as the last woman alive to save the world. At least that's the impression you get from this book. This is the first of a trilogy. And on her way along this journey, she meets these 3 different men at 3 different points who act as her guardians on this journey. The first man she meets is Jesse, and then Rourke, and then Michio. I love the relationship between her and Rourke. He's a priest, and she's the last woman left alive, and there's a lot of complications because of the feelings they have for each other, and I really think that dynamic is intriguing. I also love Michio and the way they slowly kind of build that relationship. I love that Eve's a very badass female character, and I feel like there's not a lot of characters in Smut like her. I do feel like there's a lot of characters in like sci-fi kind of like her, and I think that's where they're kind of getting this trope from, but she kicks total ass. And I do love the way that they kind of tease out information about her aphid abilities, because she has all these different things that she can do. I don't want to spoil things if you happen to read this, but she's connected to the aphids, whatever, in certain ways, and so she has abilities having to do with that, and I do think they do a really good job with that, with her discovering these abilities. But now here's the part I really don't like, and it makes me extremely uncomfortable reading this book. There are so many racial stereotypes in this book. Pretty much all of the men are racial stereotypes in this book. The first man she meets is Jesse. He's written as a violent Native American man who sees spirits and who people are constantly calling a savage throughout the book. So there's that. And then there's Rourke, who's an Irish Catholic priest who likes to drink a lot and who loves to box. And then there's Michio, who's this stoic Korean doctor who knows all these ancient martial arts techniques. So there's those racial stereotypes, which are bad enough. But then there's the worst one, which just puts it way over the line, and that's the villain of the series, the guy who unleashed this chemical warfare. And he's a Muslim man who is doing everything in the name of Allah, and the entire thing just feels so racist when you're reading it that it's impossible to look past. So honestly, I would normally rate these books a 3.5 for the writing, but because of all the racist shit in these books, I just could never recommend them. Speaking of kind of racist shit in Smut books, we have CoEd by Rachel Van Dyken. I bought this on impulse because it was like $1 in the Kindle store. It's about a girl who transfers to this university, and she ends up living in a room with 4 other guys. 3 of the guys happen to be pleasure ponies, as the book describes them. Basically, they belong to this company where they pleasure women for money, except that the way they're pleasuring them is not any sort of sexual thing. It's like massages and telling them they're pretty and some Reiki stuff that was weird. First of all, going into this book, I thought they were just escorts and sex workers. I didn't realize that this was like a non-sexual thing, so that was disappointing. Might as well start off with the racist stuff. Like I said, they really fetishize her skin color in this, and it is super uncomfortable. They didn't start doing that until later in the book, or else I probably would have quit this book pretty quickly. By that point, I was like, well, it's a short book, I might as well finish it, I guess. It was a bad book. I mean, even just aside from the racist stuff, which was uncomfortable, and I would not recommend this book based just off that, but even taking that away, it was still a bad book. It's a very light, frilly, like fun book for the most part, except for this, once again, mysterious background with this guy. He says he's killed a girl, except you know that like he didn't actually kill a girl. when they finally do have that scene where they talk about his tragic backstory and the girl that he killed, it feels a lot more grounded than the rest of the book. It feels darker than the rest of the book. It feels completely at odds tonally with the rest of the book, but it adds weight because it feels real. And then they decide to go screw that all up immediately, and they do this really melodramatic, stupid twist that I absolutely hated, and just turned it into basically a soap opera near the end. I really don't recommend this book. The only thing I enjoyed about it was some of the friendship back and forth, bickery stuff. That was cute, the rest sucked. I give this one 1 out of 5. The last smut book I read was Torment Me by Annabel Joseph. This book was about a girl who is a sex worker, and she eventually gets a client who is a bit too rough for her. I had some problems with this book, mostly that the main character was just extremely naive, which would be fine, except she's been a sex worker for 10 years, and she's just so inexperienced, and I just find that a little unbelievable. Everything that her new client does is like shocking to her because she's never been treated poorly by a guy, which just seems a little hard to believe that no client has ever treated her less than fantastic. I loved him, and I felt like this book could have been so much better, and that aggravated me. The sex scenes in this are definitely rough. I mean, they're way rougher than a lot of the smut I've read. I felt like it did a really good job of showing what realistic, consensual, forceful sex is, although there is some stuff that definitely like crosses the line a little bit. This is a series, and I am going to read the second one in the series because of how much I love the love interest W. That's what they call him. I'm just really hoping that the main character kind of grows up and changes in the second book because I can't deal with her. One other thing I really liked was the in-between stuff. The book was mainly just their sex scenes together, but there was some in-between scenes where it shows her life at home. She has a boyfriend who is a drug addict, and I thought that was really well done. It felt like a very realistic look of what it's like to be in love with a drug addict. It didn't seem over dramatic. It just felt very instantly sketched out and realistic, and I appreciated them and actually wish that there was more of that. I gave Torment Me a 3. There was actually one more that I forgot about. I just finished reading The Red by Tiffany Reizs. I've actually read this book before, but I just read it again, and it's so good. It's about a girl whose art house is going under, and so when this guy Malcolm comes in and offers to buy her body in exchange for a bunch of really expensive paintings that will salvage her art house, she decides to go for it. This book is something else. It's got a very supernatural element to it because each chapter is kind of a new scene, and it's a new kink that they explore in each chapter, which I think is so interesting. Basically, Malcolm is able to transform her back room into the painting or into the scene that they're doing. So her bed in her back room can totally turn into a slave market, or it can completely turn into a cave or an orchard or whatever. Because once again, you don't really know what he is, but she suspects he's the devil. I really enjoyed that the chapters were so creative and explored different kinks. Most of them were not stuff I was into, but they're just so well written that I was like, yep, this is hot. There's not a lot of character exploration, I will say, because there's really not a lot of book in between the sex scenes. It is just a lot of sex. But I think it's just so creative and so fun and imaginative, and I am so looking forward to the sequel that's coming out soon. And I gave The Red 4 out of 5 stars. So that's all the sexy shit I read this month. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll come back for more. Bye.